List as kind of the not well, we'll talk about it later, but Heathers.
Yeah.
I remember when that movie came out, it was so unexpected because it's like a Breakfast Club sort of thing. It's got the heartthrobs, Christian Slater and Winona Ryder, and you're all like, ooh.
And then it gets really dark.
It gets real dark. And I think that was what the kiss at the end of the 80s, because it was like 1989, so it's like, okay, things are changing now.
That movie really had an impact on me. I started smoking Lucky Strikes right after. I literally went and bought a pack of unfiltered Lucky Strikes literally after I saw the movie. And all of a sudden Christian Slater was just the most amazing actor I'd ever seen in my life.
Dude, Christian Slater was super cool. Like, one of my favorite movies he was ever in was Pump Up the Volume. You know, where he was just like he's got the pirate radio rig, and he starts coming on, and he gets picked up like by the school, but it's only in his little town. It's not like wide broadcast, but he's just talking. I was like, that's what we're doing now. Like, podcasting is kind of similar, but every kid wanted to do that. They wanted to have a radio rig in their room and sit there and be like,
Speaking of Pump Up the Volume, you did see that we announced Samantha Mathis for the Houston Horror Film Festival, which is pretty exciting.
That's badass.
Yeah, Princess Peach. Princess Peach herself. Yeah, so that's pretty awesome. But yeah, and you know, Christian Slater just genuinely, he's a good dude. I had the opportunity to hang out with him for a little bit when I was in college, when he was filming an interview with a vampire.
Oh, wow.
I never told you that story?
No, dude.
Dude. Okay, so a buddy of ours was an extra on the set, and he called us up to go meet him over in New Orleans drinking. So we all jump in the car and we go over, and he's like, yeah, I'm at Pato's Annex. Got a buddy of mine coming with me from set. Just come meet us over here, you know, whatever o'clock. And so we hauled ass down, got to New Orleans, and walk into Pato's, and he sees us, and he comes up, and he's sitting with this dude that's just at the bar, just leaning on his hand, baseball cap on, and we walk up, and he turns around, and it's Christian Slater.
Dude.
And that was right around the time that River Phoenix had passed away and stuff, so he was just giving us all the hot gossip on who were the drug heads and Hollywood and shit. And I remember distinctly he talked about how bad of a cokehead Gene Hackman was. It was pretty awesome, man. Like I said, he wanted to get away from set, didn't want to be around a bunch of people. Him and Dave kind of hit it off, and he was like, hey, you know a place we can go? And it's like, yeah, we'll go to Pato's Annex. Let me get my buddies to come down and meet us.
It
was pretty badass. Yeah. And then just everything that I've seen in him, you know, even he kind of like fell off. And then I remember he popped up on an episode of My Name is Earl. Have you ever seen that episode?
Oh, yeah.
And he just seems like such a good fucking dude, man.
He really does.
He just seems awesome.
Have you ever seen him do a Jack Nicholson impression?
It's pretty much what it is.
It's
yeah,
spot on.
I would imagine so. Yeah, so it's the 35th anniversary of Heathers. Think about that. We're old.
Dude. So, I just bought... So, I told you about it last week, but wasn't on the show, I don't think. So, in my record collecting, I've been hitting thrifts and, you know, the various stores over here, Randall Shop and Bill's Shop, Lonesome Frog and stuff. And anyway, Bill was having a sale a couple weeks ago, and he had a whole bunch of cassettes. And I've got a cassette deck out in my garage that I have dedicated. I will only allow the music to go out there that you could repair a Camaro in an 80s montage. So it's like big hair metal, you know, you've got Judas Priest and Motley Crue and stuff like that. Like, I told the girls, like, I always throw on that Judas Priest record when we're washing the car. So I'm like, she's like, why do we have to listen to this? I'm like, it's the law, guys. But it's so damn hot, and I've gotten a whole bunch of cassettes recently for, like, super cheap. I've been just lucky, but I don't have any way to listen to them because I have to go out to the garage like we did last week and sweat my balls off for, like, 45 seconds of tunes, right? So I bought this Walkman off eBay for, like, $5 or something. and it worked, but when you press play, you could tell the tape lagged. It was playing slow, so I need a new belt. So I go up to electronic parts outlet. I was like, yeah, I need a belt for a Walkman, and the kid working there, it's like he can't be more than like 15, 16 years old. He's obviously the son of somebody that works there, but he's very, very young. And so he gets the keys and he walks me back to the case where the belts are, and I'm like looking online to figure out the exact specs of the belt. I finally found the specs of the belt, and I was like, sweet. I was like, it's electronic parts outlet, which if you've ever been there, it looks like that movie Johnny Mnemonic where everything's just like broken parts everywhere.
Yes.
And so I was like, you ever fix or play with these? And he's like, I've never actually seen one before.
It's like it's a museum piece.
He's like, people come in here all the time looking to buy them, but I've never seen one or seen how they worked or anything. I'm like, damn. It used to be a big deal, right? In fact, when I was looking for this one, they had one of those yellow sport Walkmans.
Yeah.
But it was like $40. I was like, oh, that's a lot for a tape player. But I don't know. It's on my watch list. We'll see. Anyway, welcome everybody to Scary Dad Podcast number 184. And this one is called Quintessentially 80s. It is July 31st, 2023. And, yeah. Mr. Gomez, please.
First, the old business.
All right. So since it's quintessentially 80s, I had to go back to the year that is quintessentially 80s. And so, like when people talk about the 60s and the whole flower power and hippie movement and Woodstock and all that, what they mean by the 60s is 1968.
Yeah, I would say, Vietnam War.
Prior to 1968, it was still
the 50s.
It was up and down, going into... And then after 1968, we were into the 70s, right? So through the 80s, while the 80s actually is very much book-ended by, its beginning and ending as far as the way music is between, like, the beginning of MTV and, Heathers, basically,
yeah.
Right? But quintessentially 80s, I had to go to the year that defines the 80s as 1987. And if you remember, we did 2 episodes on the 80s, or almost 3 episodes on 1987, the year, in which for like a couple of hours each episode, all we really did was top line all of the different stuff that came out in 1987. Mm-hmm. All the movies, all the TV shows, all of the cartoons, all of the records and stuff. And there's just so much of a volume of incredible stuff that came out in 87. So for our quintessentially 80s show, had to go to July 1987, right in the middle of it. So, you turn on the radio, what are you most likely to hear? What's on the radio? Coming in at number 8 was I Want to Dance with Somebody by Whitney Houston.
I want to dance with somebody.
Number 7 was Luca by Suzanne Vega.
Uh-huh.
Remember that one?
Yeah.
Next is Rhythm Is Gonna Get You by Gloria Estefan. That's about as 80s as you get as far as some pop songs. I Want Your Sex by George Michael. Controversial at the time, pretty tame by today's standards. All right. Number 3 was Alone by Heart. Number 2 was Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For by U2. And number 1 was Shakedown by Bob Seger from Beverly Hills Cop Part 2. That's the number 1 song. So like last week we talked about the prior years. Number 1 was Beverly Hills Cop theme.
Right.
And so yeah. All right. This is where we get into the business right here. Is if you liked movies in 1987 and you're just like, okay, I want to go see a movie, and you walk up to the box office and you say, ticket please, which one of these movies, which were all playing in the theaters at the same time, would you buy your ticket for? And I'm going to go with in order of where they stood on the
Marquee.
on the marquee. No, on the box office.
Okay.
This was number 1 down through like number 15. So we talked about James Bond, 1987. Today you would have been able to see The Living Daylights, the first Timothy Dalton.
Yes. Yeah.
Coming in at number 2 was The Lost Boys. So, movie we all love.
Yes.
Number 3 was La Bamba. Remember how good La Bamba was?
That was great.
Lou Diamond Phillips.
Yeah.
It's, I mean...
Very emotional movie.
It really was. Coming in at number 4, RoboCop.
Damn.
Yeah, I know. Number 5 was Summer School with Mark Harmon, and has like...
Such an underrated movie. Me and Melissa talk about that movie all the day.
Has... 2 of the biggest horror fans that most other, like every horror fan we know aspires to be as big a horror fan as the 2 dudes in Summer School.
That's why I don't think it's as appreciated as it should be.
It's so good.
And like, but Melissa absolutely loves that movie to the point where this morning we were talking about something to do with Kirstie Alley. She said, you know that woman from Cheers. And I said, Kirstie Alley? She goes, yeah, the one that was in Summer School. You know, that's like it's like the movie that pops up first before anything is Summer School.
Dude. Yeah, Summer School was good. And like you say, it's kind of a sleeper. Because everybody's seen it. That was one of those that was just on TV a lot. But some of those scenes in that movie are just iconic.
Yeah.
Just absolutely... The eyeball with the pencil sticking through it.
She
prosthetic.
she has an art piece she's working on right now from that movie. That's kind of going to be a surprise. She's breaking out at the film festival, so
It's pretty badass.
It's very badass. It really made me appreciate it even all the more because just the practical effects that went into that movie. It's like Stan Winston was involved with the project or something, man.
Okay, number 6, Snow White, the reissue, the re-release, from which I actually remember my grandparents took us to go see that when they came to visit. We went and saw Snow White in the theater. Number 7, Superman 4, Quest for Peace.
Yeah, the Nuclear Man.
Number 8 was Full Metal Jacket.
Damn.
Dude, again, you're standing there looking at the marquee and you've got a couple of dollars in your pocket and you can buy 1 ticket. We'll talk about that in a minute. Because I've seen all of these in the theater when they came out.
And like depending on the mood I'm in, I'll revisit most of these again, you know.
Number 9 was Dragnet with...
Dan Aykroyd.
And Tom Hanks. Where...
the pagans.
Yeah.
And what's his name? What's his name that was in 9 to 5? Damn it, I can't remember his name.
Dabney Coleman?
Dabney Coleman, yes.
And
his part was so funny because he talked with a lisp. I don't know if you remember that. It was fucking hilarious.
I used to remember watching that movie a lot. The scene where they raid the milk company with the anti-personnel tank, and they're just like popping all of those wires or the pipes, and milk's just everywhere. Who was the lead pagan? He was
also the priest in the movie. He's friends with the mayor. I can't remember his name. Damn it.
But yeah, he's. But yeah, Dragnet. If you haven't seen it in a while, it doesn't get mentioned often, but it is really good. Number 10, Adventures in Babysitting. That was a thing. Where the baby was it? What's her name? Elizabeth Shue.
Yes.
With the little girl with the Thor helmet and stuff.
Yeah. See, I was never overly into that one. I was more of a fan of Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead.
And they get them confused.
Yeah.
They're very similar, but yeah. All right, number 11, Beverly Hills Cop Part 2. Number 12 is Jaws 4. The Revenge.
Christopher Plummer, by the way.
Christopher Plummer,
yes.
That's right. Number 13, Roxanne, Steve Martin, which was never one of my favorites. But
it's a good movie, though.
But I mean, it's not my favorite Steve Martin movie, but it's better than a lot of stuff that's out there. We've got The Untouchables, Kevin Costner and Robert De Niro, Sean Connery. What a great movie!
That was a great movie. Yeah.
All right, Revenge of the Nerds 2, Nerds in Paradise. We've got Rush. All right, and then The Witches of Eastwick. Talking about Jack Nicholson and Michelle Pfeiffer. Who's that? Cher and Susan Sarandon.
Yes. Yep.
That was a big screen horror movie / like that kind of brought a little bit more of the horror aspect into the mainstream.
It introduced a lot of people to the
because it was. I mean, it was more of a twisted rom-com as such.
Yeah,
but
it had tropes in it.
But it had some scary scenes and stuff like that. And then Spaceballs. I mean, dude. Okay, so you got your ticket. What are we going to see? Out of that list. That's a rough call, man.
It's one of those things where it would depend on what I'm in the mood for. So I'd probably have to take like 3 of the top ones out of those that I would consider, which would be Full Metal Jacket, RoboCop, and then Lost Boys. And then from there, am I in the mood for drama? Am I in the mood for, horror? Am I in the mood for laugh, parody, and just intense, weird shit? Yeah. So, in the end, damn, man. Because honestly, Full Metal Jacket is the best movie out of those 3.
Oh, of course.
By far.
It is the best film. But again, like you said, depending on your mood.
And what I tell people all the time, like with Full Metal Jacket, it's a long fucking movie. But the movie's so good, you don't realize how long it is.
But Full Metal Jacket's kind of hard to watch because it's real.
Yeah.
Whereas the other 2 are more escapist. So depending on how you want your
what you're in the mood for. Like I said, what you're in the mood for.
But if I have to put Lost Boys up against RoboCop, I'm almost always going to have to go with RoboCop.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's just a funner movie. It's a much more fun movie.
Yeah. I mean,
because to this day, I watch RoboCop more than I do any of those. I'll throw RoboCop on as background noise all the fucking time and like perk up during certain scenes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was so good.
That was the movies on this date. On this date, 1987. All right. TV shows more or less the same as last year. All these were last week. These are all successful shows that were still on in '87. But your tops are going to be Miami Vice, Who's the Boss, Cosby Show, Punky Brewster, Charles in Charge, and Moonlighting. And that's it for the old business. We'll be right back and we'll come back with the new.
Sega challenges you with the ultimate video game, the Sega Master System.
Hang on.
With more accurate control, more detailed graphics, more levels of play.
Awesome.
The Sega Master System comes with power-based 2 control pads, light phaser, and 2 great video games. Hang On and Safari Hunt.
Gotcha.
And with other games like Rambo, Outrun, and Choplifter, the excitement never stops. The Sega Master System. The challenge will always be there.
Michael and Sam have just moved to Santa Carla, California. They're about to discover its secret.
Notice anything unusual about Santa Carla yet?
No. It's a pretty cool place. If you're a Martian.
Or a vampire.
When you scream.
So where are you? The flying nun?
I'm your brother, Sammy. Help me.
Stay back! Stay back!
What's happening to me, Star?
Get yourself a good sharp steak. Drive it right through his heart.
You're a vampire, Michael. My own brother, a damn blood-sucking vampire.
Oh, you wait till Mom finds out, buddy. When a vampire bites it, it's never a pretty sight.
Michael, they're coming! Oh, shit!
Alrighty, and we are back. And Mr. Gomez, if you would.
New business is new business, and this is new business.
Okay, so there's not a tremendous amount of new business. Found a couple of kind of wacky stories, but of course the big news right now is the passing of one Sinead O'Connor. She was very rock and roll. She's more rock and roll than people realize, I think. talk about anti-establishment, which is what the foundation of rock and roll kind of was at one time. She passed away at the age of 56. Very, very sad. She suffered from a lot of mental health issues. She recently had a son that committed suicide and passed away. Sinead kind of did at the age of 56.
Did you read
Morrissey's comments? Yes.
His were the ones that I most agreed with, because very much the things that she's being praised for today are the things that got her lost her record, got her chased out of the music industry.
Right. And it contributed to
the things that she was mocked for.
Yeah.
And, there's no telling, I'm sure, because you could just kind of see it whenever she was, when she was famous and she was on things, you could see that she was a confrontational and probably difficult to deal with anyway. Just her personality was just disagreeable, which a lot of artists are. So this isn't a knock on Sinead, but the fact that she wouldn't play ball, like I'm going to do things my way or whatever, and they're like, now they're calling her an icon and strong and all of this stuff, but like last week, if you would have looked it up, they would have called her troubled and troublesome.
Well,
and
the same effect that happened with Whitney Houston.
Yeah.
Whitney Houston was mocked viciously until she died.
Oh yeah, and then
all of a sudden she was just a deity.
Well, and that's weird, and it was ironic because I posted it on Facebook myself, but the Smiths, in 1987, the record called Strange Ways Here We Come, there's a song on it called Paint a Vulgar Picture. Mm-hmm. And the lyrics are, at the record company meeting, on their hands a dead star. And the lyrics go on to just describe how exciting and awesome it is that they get to deal with all of the repackaging and reissuing all of the old stuff and the rebranding, and how just horrifying it is that the humanity is gone. Right. It's like they're just a commodity that we can repackage because they died.
Yeah, now it's trending again. Let's go ahead and jump on it.
And I noticed that with Kurt Cobain too. A lot of people don't remember, they weren't paying attention, but in life, Cobain was a very abrasive and confrontational, and he was a force of nature, but he was also a prankster, and he laughed a lot, and he did a whole bunch of stuff just to be obnoxious, just to get a reaction and stuff like that. And you could like him, or you could not like him, or you could like his music and then think he was just a shit show or whatever. As soon as he died, all of the pictures of him were this like pensive, blue-eyed, blonde-haired troubadour, lost, broken soul, which he was, but that's not what his public persona was. And I'd almost be curious what he would think about the way he's been portrayed since death.
It would make him sick.
Because it's like, dude, that's like, they made him look like Neil Young, and that was not who he was, But I guarantee you, in 6 months, there's going to be a, re-release, like vinyl 180-gram pressings of Sinead's albums.
Yeah.
And they're going to go fucking platinum, or at least gold, because, everybody's like suddenly sorry. I'm not claiming to be a big fan. I liked some of her songs.
I love her song, and full disclosure, I actually preferred Prince's version of the song. He wrote the song, so he kind of like had a different take on it when he sang it. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's a beautiful song. But I'm more proud of her. Just like I said, she was rock and roll. She wasn't given credit for just how rock and roll she was.
Absolutely.
But to quote Morrissey directly, she had proud vulnerability, and there's a certain music industry hatred for singers who don't fit in. This I know only too well, and that's the problem. Is that if this would have came from anybody other than Morrissey, I think more people would have responded, yeah, he's right. But Morrissey's kind of a dick, and Morrissey's kind of a, look at me, I'm a victim, don't you feel sorry for me. Mm-hmm. And it makes people not like Morrissey. When Morrissey dies, I can promise you, people are going to all of a sudden be huge Smiths fans and Morrissey fans.
They're going to take him for the lyrics and the content of his art versus who his actual personal personality was.
He went on to say, and they are never praised until death, when finally they can't answer back. You praise her now only because it is too late. You hadn't the guts to support her when she was alive and she was looking for you. I mean, why is anybody surprised that Sinead O'Connor is dead? Who cared enough to save Judy Garland, Whitney Houston, Amy Winehouse, Marilyn Monroe, Billie Holiday? Where do you go when death can be the best outcome? Was this music madness worth Sinead's life? And I mean, like I said, he's right. And he's not right to a point. He's right. And it's just the way the industry is. You know, these powerful executives, Patrice O'Neal said it best. To be one of the super wealthy, rich motherfuckers, you got to not care. Mm-hmm. You got to not give a fuck if you can eat. You got to not care. And that's how these powerful executives kind of are. They use you till they can't use you anymore, then fuck them.
Yeah. And whether that's a personality that is inherent to the person, or whether that's something that's grown over time. You know what I mean? Because a lot of times these executives, they're under pressure too, and it's like, what do we do? What do we do? And they have to, what's going to keep us from turning into Bud Light, right? Like, we got to do something. It's like,
I didn't talk about this last week, did I?
You did not.
Okay. Just
let's go to like different situations. Talking about music industry executives, I mean, it sucks.
Let's go to a happy place. Okay. So this headline, I think I saved this story the night we finished the last podcast, and I was like, yes, we got to go ahead and do this. So headline: drug-addled cocaine sharks may be gobbling bales of narcotics dumped off the Florida coast. Study reveals they're getting crazy brain. Straight out of a fucking movie. Experts have suspected that sharks off the coast of Florida are coming into contact with large amounts of cocaine that's getting dumped into the ocean. And just for reference, and for anyone that doesn't know this, we actually found one on a rig that I was on way back in the day. But a lot of drug smugglers dump cargo into the Gulf of Mexico, or they used to also do it in certain swamps in Louisiana. They dump them, usually have some kind of tracker on them. A boat comes along, picks it up, brings it to shore. Bales and bales of cocaine, and these cocaines are basically just a huge.
So it's basically a delivery.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not like they're dumping cargo because they're being chased.
No, they dump the cargo.
This is part of the
it's like
process.
A drop area where somebody's supposed to come with a boat, pick it up, then go ahead and bring it in. That way they don't have to land somewhere and everything else. So hauls of cocaine are said to be dropped in the ocean either to let smugglers collect them, or as an attempt for criminals to escape law enforcement. Large batches of narcotic has been known to wash up on Florida beaches, and a marine biologist recently wanted to see whether sharks off the coast of Florida were consuming the substance. So he made a documentary for Discovery Channel called Cocaine Sharks.
Of course he did.
They went to the Florida Keys to investigate reports that sharks consume drugs there. During a dive, they spotted a hammerhead shark and a sandbar shark that appeared to be behaving in an odd manner. They conducted an experiment in which they dropped packages that looked like bales of cocaine. They observed sharks swimming straight to the packages and just biting into them to test them out. And of course, a shark's tooth is pretty sharp. It's going to bust right through that bundle, and they're going to go ahead and get a quick bump of whatever's in there. It's important to note scientists don't know for sure whether the sharks are consuming the cocaine, but it's definitely there to where, in all likelihood, they probably are. I mean, if it's floating around, a shark is going to go test it out and see what it's all about. It just takes one hit with their teeth. It's going to bust it open.
Then they're all like that chick in Up in Smoke, where she like.
Yeah, so cocaine sharks are the next
the
thing.
Ajax or the Comet or whatever.
Okay, so this is a pretty crazy story out of Arizona, which it's been hot, as you know, been really, really hot. So Phoenix, Arizona, near the airport, as a matter of fact, propane tanks all of a sudden started exploding at this propane facility not far from the airport. 119-degree heat at the time. They weren't sure what was causing them to suddenly blow up, but they were literally exploding, and these tanks were flying up to 500 yards away like missiles through the air. There's these huge fireballs just all of a sudden launching. And they actually had to shut down the airport and stuff, but it's getting crazy hot out there. You know, I remember we used to, on really, really warm days when we were having a flare, which for flaring, whenever you're producing oil and gas, you get garbage gases that come from under the ground, and you can't just release them into the air, and you don't want to send them in because it's pointless. You can't do anything with them, so you flare them off. You actually burn them with a pipe. You divert it to go down this pipe, and there's a flame blowing off. This heat would actually heat up some of the tanks, especially when it was hot or the wind was blowing the wrong way. We'd actually have guys out there standing, pouring water on these tanks while it was happening, because the tanks would just start exploding if you wouldn't do that, because of the fines and everything. But yeah, the pictures of and video from this fire are just absolutely insane, dude. Definitely something to check out. 150 firefighters involved in this massive blaze at this propane facility. You don't hear about propane facilities
just
exploding for no reason, so you gotta wonder if this intense heat might have something to do with it, because it's pretty crazy. And I'm wondering, I'm not gonna do that one. I'm gonna get into politics. Okay, is the heat causing people to assault other people with food? Because I'm really starting to wonder. If I gave you a donut, would your first thought be, I'm going to throw this at somebody and hit them in the face?
Depending on how hungry I was, I guess.
If I gave you a container of some fried rice from your favorite Chinese restaurant, would your first thought be, I'm going to throw it at this woman passing in this car next to me just to see what kind of,
20 years ago, maybe.
So first one up is actually out of Pennsylvania, surprisingly so. 17-year-old man was at Dunkin' Donuts one morning and apparently got into a very early morning argument, 8 a.m. on a Monday, with a couple of employees there, a 17-year-old and a 20-year-old and a 72-year-old man. And in his fury, decided to throw bagels and a cup of coffee at them, and he was arrested for assault. Gurinder Singh is the gentleman's name that decided to go ahead and just start assaulting Dunkin' Donuts workers. He was, of course, arrested for harassment. The report did not indicate if any bagels were harmed during the incident. That is one of the taglines. And following that, we move over to Myrtle Beach. And James Narcion, 31, was arrested Monday evening after a late night incident where he was walking down the street and decided to throw rice into the vehicle of a 43-year-old male witness. Interestingly enough, he missed the male, and the rice flew onto the 39-year-old woman in the passenger seat. Second question for you. If you're driving down the street and you're slowing down for a red light, and good old James is walking down the street, and for whatever reason, he tosses some fried rice at you, are you going to call the cops? That would literally be my last thought. I would fucking laugh.
I would get
I
out.
would laugh, and I would wait for the light to turn green. I would be kind of dumbfounded. I'd wait for the light to turn green, and then I would stop at the next gas station, and I would clean the rice up. But
Like
apparently,
some bum threw some rice at me.
apparently this South Carolina woman was so enraged, she went ahead and called the cops. When the cops arrived, he was holding a takeout container of rice. He didn't even throw the whole thing. He just
flung some at her.
threw some on the chopsticks and flung it at her. When the cops arrived, they found him with the container of rice and also observed rice inside the vehicle where the victim was sitting. So yeah, he was arrested by police for...
I think of this timeline. It's like, okay, I threw some rice at this guy and I missed and I hit his girlfriend and he stops the car. So I'm thinking probably he's going to hop out of the car and we're either it's going to come to fisticuffs or I'm going to throw some rice at my original intended target, right?
Right.
I'm not going to hang around and wait till the cops get there. Oh, he's on his phone. La, 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 la. Let me just kind of see what's going on. Oh, there's some blinking lights.
Yeah, so that is just kind of a wacky one. But that is our new business for this week.
Rock and roll, man. We'll see you after the break.
It's time to get going to a special offer at Pizza Hut. Just come in, order a medium or large Pizza Hut pizza to go, and get this new half-gallon thermal jug for just $1.99. And every time you order another medium or large pizza to go, bring back the jug, or any Pizza Hut jug, and we'll fill it with Pepsi absolutely free.
At your hometown Pizza Hut.
Come in for the jug. Come back for the refill.
All right, we are back. So when you called me the other day and we started talking about stuff, and you said, pop quiz. What's the first movie that comes to your mind? 80s movie. I'm like, I had a thought and you had a thought. Then I started thinking about your question about what, definitive, what is quintessentially 80s, and what sets 80s movies apart from movies that came later than them, and so I kind of came up with a checklist, and you can add to it. But I say that if you're going, they don't have to have all of these things, but it has to have several of these.
This is kind of like the question I was about to pose to you just now too. So we're definitely on the same. Because I was thinking, what criteria are you using to pick a movie that you would consider quintessentially 80s?
So, for what we're talking about, and we'll get into the list of the shows and movies and stuff later, but one staple of 80s movies that you have to have is foul-mouthed and or overly mature kids. Foul-mouthed for no reason. We're not talking about cuss words that add inflection to speeches.
Right.
We're talking about, the movie is just going along and there's 4 kids on a bicycle and one of them just has to go, son of a bitch, with no context outside of the scene. It's got to have ultra violence. There's no soft violence in 80s movies. Even in cartoons and Secret of Nim and stuff like that. You have to have darkness and violence, and that violence has to be extra bloody. Nudity. Either tasteful or questionable, it doesn't matter.
But unnecessary is definitely
unnecessary. Maybe it's necessary, but there's got to be some boobs. And in fact, there's a lot of movies that just have it. And it was they're checking off a list. It's we've got 14 seconds of boobs that we haven't used yet. Let's go ahead and find somebody willing to shoot a scene, right? Scary scenes in movies that are otherwise not scary. Just randomly, just popping up. A dream sequence for some reason that's just full of death and dismemberment and stuff, and then you go back to Rainbow Bright. There's something in there that's just got to be scary. A synth soundtrack or a pop soundtrack, or both. We're not talking John Williams orchestral music here. We're talking about a synth/pop music soundtrack. And there's got to be a toy tie-in somehow. Even if the movie's rated X, there's got to be a Linda Lovelace figure available for kids to buy at, Kmart.
Right.
Those are my criteria. So, how about yourself?
So mine wasn't quite as in-depth. So my criteria mainly was, one, soundtrack. Because I think one of the reasons why people like you and I and most of Gen X are so affected by music is because we grew up in a time where music was really, really important. So the soundtrack has to be quintessentially 80s. That classic stuff, the classic type of music, like you said, the synth pop, glam rock, just pop music in general, just that kind of soundtrack. Two, it has to be an 80s movie that's set in the 80s. There were some great fucking 80s movies that are just absolutely amazing and kind of exemplify the great movies that were coming out in the 80s, but they weren't set in the 80s. Great example, Outsiders. Amazing movie. Shit wasn't set in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of disqualified it right there. Two, it has to be a movie that doesn't necessarily hold up now. Like a movie, let's say Noah or Olivia would watch, and she'd be like, why the hell are those kids doing that?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody does anything. But what's going on? That is something that's 80s. kids riding their bikes to another town. That doesn't happen anymore. That happened when we were growing up. I did it myself, but that shit doesn't happen anymore. That's just not the way things work. Those are my main, and also subject matter that it's like you were saying, just in the 80s, they talked about some shit that's really taboo nowadays, and that you cannot get away with.
True.
With and saying that, just to lead it off, was, when the question was originally posed to me by Melissa, just for whatever reason, it was so weird because honestly, I've never said this answer to anybody before, but I immediately jumped on Fast Times at Ridgemont High. That was my immediate answer. And I haven't watched it. After I said the answer, I went ahead and did a rewatch again just because the movie is just so fucking classic. But Fast Times at Ridgemont High is a purely 80s soundtrack. It details a lot of what the angst and weird shit that we went through when we were in high school growing up. And subject matter is horrible. It is when Kids came out in the 90s, that movie kind of like freaked a lot of people out because it's basically like a documentary of Fast Times at Ridgemont High. It was underage sex. It was, inappropriate situations. It drug use. It was all these things that was a comedy.
Well, this is like
dude.
what I was going to say, because you mentioned Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and I'll save my choice for the next conversation. Yeah. But you mentioned Fast Times, so yeah, Fast Times at Ridgemont High. It's absolutely a comedy of it's a teen comedy. It's teen sex comedy, but whatever. It's kind of a genre defining of the 80s. Like there was a lot of stuff like that, like Meatballs, and just. You get kids away from their parents, and how are they going to be? And what if they're teenagers, close to adulthood? One thing that's interesting, and I had to actually look it up, because I was at Half Price Books a couple of weeks ago, and in their collectible and valuable case that's locked, they had a copy of Fast Times at Ridgemont High by Cameron Crowe, which you would know him from other movies such as Almost Famous. Mm-hmm. Anyway, and he wrote the book. He wrote the story. When he set out to write the story, he was not writing a teenage sex comedy romp. He was writing an essay for Rolling Stone. And if you remember the movie Almost Famous, the story behind Almost Famous was this little kid has graduated high school, and he's like 13 years old, 13 or 14, and his mom lied about his age when he was little, so he's graduating high school at like 14 years old. So he's very, very young. And he's working for Rolling Stone, and they don't know how old he is, right? Cameron Crowe was that guy. It really did happen to him. So he was working for Rolling Stone when he was a teenager, and they sent him to do a, kind of a undercover report on just high school in America, and he went and infiltrated this high school in New York, Ridgemont High, and made a bunch of friends and wrote a bunch of shit down. And so Fast Times at Ridgemont High is actually a true story, to the point that when it came out, the people who were actually in the book were pretty pissed off about it, and the fact that he was describing underage sex to with teenagers. So his book has been out of print for a long, long time. I think it borders on like child porn or something. Mm-hmm. But all that is to say is that it was a like undercover report of the debauchery that American high school teenagers live in. This kind of world that they live in, this nasty, sex-filled, all this stuff. And then they just turned it around, and they're like, okay, let's put Sean Penn in there. Let's make some comedy out of this. Not exactly what the movie was, what the book was intended, but it absolutely. That's how it was. That's how kids in the 80s acted. And there's so many great scenes of just being in the mall.
Yeah.
Like that's where all the kids hung out.
That's where hung out.
Was the mall.
The arcade, the food court, you know, it's very, very much our childhood, our teenage years.
So I was on a plane home from a work trip overseas, and I had a lot of time. So I thought, hey, I'll sit here and bone up on some movies. And I watched several, because this was a very, very long flight, and I'd already watched like 2 or 3 films. And I was like, hey, Fast Times. I haven't seen that in forever. And I was kind of embarrassed because, dude, there is more unnecessary nudity in that movie. There's so many sex scenes. It's rough. It's great, but it's just awkward sitting next to somebody on a plane.
Well, yeah.
Who isn't watching the movie with you.
Yeah, because like I said, that movie just covers a lot of taboo. It covers abortion. It covers like so many taboo topics that now.
Date rape.
Yeah. It's pretty wild. And unnecessary nudity. It is everything. It's the quintessential 80s movie.
Yeah. So when you asked that question, the first thing that came to my mind was the Goonies.
Yeah.
Now, the Goonies being the epic pirate buried treasure fantasy that it is, to me was also very, very realistic in its portrayal of the kids.
Yes.
Right. So whenever I was their age, and when this movie came out, I lived in a small town in South Texas that was a coastal town. It was called Portland, Texas. It's a suburb of Corpus Christi. And so Corpus Christi sits where it does, and then there's a couple of bays and inlets and a long bridge that connects the two towns. And so from my house, I could ride my bike to the pier, to the beach, to really anywhere. It was a very small town. And me and my friends used to ride our bikes, and so there was this old house that had burnt down, and it was just like burnt down to structure and studs, but there was stuff still in it that had burnt down with it. So like we peeled some magnets out of some speakers that had burnt up, you know, and like there was just cool stuff. Like imagine if a house burnt down and nobody went in and actually took anything out of it.
Right.
The stuff you could recover if you were just a curious kid. And we swept off a good spot, and it was kind of our little hangout, and the grass got tall so nobody could see us back there, so we used to sit and smoke cigarettes, and you know, like we were free. We were free like that. And when I was like 12 years old, you know, 11, 12, that was the life, you know. So these kids, you know, first exploring an attic and looking at the stuff that's not supposed to be up there, and then being like, oh, hey, here's some shit. And then everybody's not believing them, so they're going to go out and explore it on their own. And then they get into some shit, and then there's the scenes that are unnecessarily violent, like with the dead guy in their freezer.
Yes.
There's the foul-mouthed kids. There isn't any nudity, but you can forgive that because it does have a soundtrack that's got Cyndi Lauper on.
Oh yeah, it's got a definitely 80s soundtrack. That's for damn sure.
And of course, then you got Corey Feldman, and you can't quintessentially 80s anything without him in it. Sean Astin, I mean, the Fratellis,
a young Brolin.
Josh Brolin, dude, like there's so many great actors and performances. Data,
yeah,
like I don't think anybody he just won an Academy Award. Nobody knew that the Data from Goonies was going to
turn around. It up.
So yeah, that's my quintessentially 80s movie. I wouldn't say it's necessarily my favorite, but if you were like, hey, 80s movies now, Goonies is the one. It just lands there.
Okay, so I'm going to give you one that isn't mine. It's Melissa's. And when I say this movie, you're going to be like, I never would have thought of that movie. But this movie is definitely 100% 80s. From the music all the way through, okay? And the thing about it is, the reason you haven't thought about this movie is because of the type of music it is. Urban Cowboy.
There's that. Oh, hell yeah.
Urban Cowboy is that old school 80s country music, honky tonk shit that we both kind of grew up knowing what country music was. Mm-hmm. And just everything with that movie as far as the people, the wear, the dress, everything is 100% 80s. storyline, cheating ass husband, cheating ass boyfriend. I mean, just the whole thing between Sissy and the other girl, and it's just very, very much 80s.
Well, it's very much 80s. It's also very much Houston and Texas 80s.
Yeah.
So growing up, I mean, and my parents weren't this way, but my dad kind of was. My dad was he's kind of a roughneck, working the oil field in the 80s. But he was also, he had been a radio DJ and liked all kinds of music. And, he was also a Texan, so he'd wear boots and hats and stuff. But yeah, I mean, like, my dad has cowboy hats that have, like, the rattlesnake headband on them. Or, even better, the headband that has the, like, the feather.
See, my dad had those. My dad had the wicker type, the tan cowboy hats with the feather band going all the way around, and it was like raised up like a billboard in the middle.
Well, I'm thinking of the ones that look like it's a craft, like it's feathers put together in such a way, but they kind of like sprout out like a rising sun. So you got colored feathers in the middle, and then the lighter color one's out, and it looks kind of like a badge that sits on the front of your hat.
My dad used to buy those in Mexico.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
and Gillies had its heyday in the 80s. Gillies was 100% an 80s iconic establishment.
Mm-hmm.
So Urban Cowboy, actually, I didn't even think of that. I was like, holy shit, you're right. Mm-hmm. That movie is 100% 80s, just from a different perspective than where I came from.
Yeah.
I came from more hip-hop and rock was the main shit I listened to. But yeah, Urban Cowboy would definitely qualify as something that is 100% representative of that time period, for sure.
Well, and you had asked, like, the movies that look like, whenever you look up, like, 80s aesthetic, and so you've got a whole bunch of neon, you've got a bunch of palm trees, you've got kind of a Southern California tequila sunrise sort of look to a lot of things, vibrant colors, pinks and oranges and neon greens and stuff. And there's memes now that'll be like, what the 80s, what marketing makes you want to think the 80s are, and it looks like a Kmart commercial or something, versus how it was with, like, the dark paneling and the color. If you did have sheetrock, it was amber.
The shirt that I have on right now. Yeah.
But it was like amber colored from cigarette smoke.
Yeah.
And you had like floral print couches with like canvas coverings and stuff. That was the 80s. I mean, that's
lots
what everybody's...
of linoleum.
Yeah. and avocado colored appliances because they just lasted from the 70s.
Yeah.
But the truth, like, all of that neon had to come from somewhere. And if you've never seen it before, I'll invite you where to go find it, where it looks as legit as it's ever going to look. There's a movie called Ninja 3, The Domination. And if you've never seen it before, I invite you to pause this, go watch it, and come back, and you're going to be like, that dude's right. Ninja 3 Domination is the most over-the-top ninja movie probably possible. I don't think it's possible for it to be more crazy. Like, it is absolutely insane. So you've got this opening scene. There's a couple of guys on a golf course, right? And they're out there playing golf, and there's a ninja who's there to kill one or both of them. He's a ninja assassin. So Ninja kills the guys, and then I don't even know if anybody ever actually calls the cops, but all of the cops just show up on the golf course all at once with all of their cars and their helicopters and everything, and they start trying to kill the ninja. And so the ninja it's like a 20-minute intro to the movie. This ninja just kills everybody. Like, in every possible, like, he's got stars, he's got swords, he's got a blowgun, he's got a spear, like, he raids a helicopter, and they keep shooting him, and he keeps getting hit, but he just keeps ninjaing on until, like, he's killed all of these cops, and they finally get him. They finally get him, like, 8 times with a machine gun, and then he goes and runs off, mortally wounded. Mm-hmm. So he's killed, like, 30 cops because he killed somebody. And he finds this girl who's like this 22-year-old brunette chick who just happens to be a telephone lineman. So she's up on a telephone pole fixing some stuff and sees the ninja collapse on the ground. And so she climbs down to go help him. And whenever she's trying to give this dude mouth to mouth, he breathes his soul into her. So then she goes home. And this is where the first part of the conversation comes in handy. When you get to her apartment, it is as stereotypically 80s as it's possible to be. She's got like an old refrigerator from the 50s that has a neon palm tree like on the top of it, and like everything's in all these triangles and weird Art Deco stuff everywhere, and it looks like a designer trying to remake the 80s just blew up all over her apartment. So then she has to try to exorcise the ninja demon, but then she's also a ninja as she's doing it. So she's both a good ninja and a bad ninja while she's trying to get help. It's a good movie.
Okay, so
and it's full of ninjas. I didn't even write that. A good 80s movie has to have ninjas in it. Has to have at least one.
Well, 80s movie that has ninjas is a good 80s movie. Not every 80s movie needs to have ninjas.
True, but if you have ninjas and none of the other checklist parts, you still qualify.
Yes, yeah, that's what I'm saying. As long as you got the ninjas in it, you're good to go. Okay, so you just brought up the difference in perspective as far as what the 80s actually looked like versus what people thought they should look like. And a movie that I always found kind of deals with both of those aspects is definitely an 80s movie. It's a classic. It kind of still holds up pretty well, but it's still kind of an odd movie in terms of watching it now. Would be The Lost Boys for sure. And what's interesting is, you got Michael over here, who's dark brooding, kind of that rock and roll look that we're familiar with, and then you got his little brother, who's bright, cheerful, wearing all the multicolored neon stuff and everything, both living together and cohabitating and being best friends. Just showing those different variances between the 80s. But if you look at that movie, as far as you have the Frog Brothers, who you don't know how fucking old they are. You got to assume they're the same age as Corey Haim because they kind of like got a connection with him and everything. So you got to think that it's a high school kids. Where the fuck are their parents? They're just out fighting vampires
and running a comic book store.
And they're brothers, but they don't look alike. What the hell is going on with this movie? It is, and then you got Michael and his gang just riding around on dirt bikes, living free. Nobody's really questioning what the fuck is going on right now. Great soundtrack. 100% 80s music and shit. It is definitely what it would qualify.
Well, then if you pause the movie at the right spot, or even if you don't, but you see Sam, Corey Haim's character, he's got a shirtless dude.
Yes,
poster on his closet door.
Rico Suave looking dude.
He's on his closet. Which of course they never have any kind of love interest. The only one that has a love interest is Michael.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if they ever kiss because he gets bitten and changed, right? Like, they're supposed to be soulmate. Like, he likes her, he pursues her, but they don't really, all they ever really kind of do is hug. But that's the extent of any kind of romantic interlude at all in the entire movie.
Right.
But Sam's got a shirtless dude on the wall. And that's, it's like, hey, but he's also 13, 14 years old.
Right.
So it's kind of hard to say, but there is that. And he's all fashionable. He is
very, very fashionable. That's for damn sure.
The Frog Brothers are in military gear, and Michael's in jeans and a leather jacket, and all the rest of the vampires are in jeans and chains, and they're all punk rocked out. And Sam's all flamboyant and looks like a Elton John video, really.
Right.
So...
Hey, you know what I found interesting, which I thought about this the other day, and I just double-checked it to see, but the two movies came out the same year. You get Lost Boys and Near Dark.
Mm-hmm.
They're very similar. Because you got the farm kid who meets the female vampire, becomes obsessed with her quickly. She turns him, and then his family's trying to save him.
And he spends the whole movie trying not to trying not to go through
same fucking movie. It's just different sets. It's the weirdest shit. And you got to wonder, who kind of piggybacked off of who. But
I think they were just made at the same time.
They just happened to be made at the same time. But it's just the familiarities between the two movies are very interesting.
And I would say, I really have to say that Near Dark is a superior film.
I agree, and to me it holds up better, honestly.
I think Lost Boys is more fun to watch.
Yeah, it wasn't as big of a budget as Lost Boys. It didn't have the cast that Lost Boys did, but to me it's definitely the superior movie between the two.
I still get to the thing where no matter how, even though he cures her at the end, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's just a weird cure, though.
Like with the blood transfusion, but it really doesn't matter how cured they are. That woman has killed hundreds of people, if not thousands, because she's been a vampire for 10 years, and she has to hunt every night. So do the math on that. There's no settling down. And having a family, dude, you're a freaking mass murderer. You've killed more people than most people who are famous for killing a lot of people. There's at the very least, there's a little bit of psychological damage in there. It's you wouldn't think it was just what the hell did you kick the dog for? I've killed 1,000 people.
Fuck the dog. You serious right now?
All right. Another one, just because of the auspices of what it takes to be a teenager in the 80s, Weird Science.
Oh, God, yes.
Hey, we've got computers and we got porno mags. And we can hack things. We're going to change the world. And I remember rewatching Weird Science, and it's weird the way your brain works, especially with exposition, because you know exactly what's going on, and so you have these scenes in your head. Then when you rewatch a movie like Weird Science, you realize that your brain actually connected a lot of the dots that the movie didn't. Right? Because they never explained how they were going to make her. Right? They're just computers, and we're just going to feed a whole bunch of stuff into a scanner, and then she just appeared. They don't even have a printer. She just...
There's no mention of AI anywhere.
She just appears, right? And you just accept the fact that it happened. But in your brain, you're like, okay, obviously there was some sort of something that made her come out. Maybe they printed her, or transported her somehow. She got Star Trek'd. You know what I mean? But there's no device in there to make it happen. She just appears, and you're just
from a Barbie doll,
and you just and then you just go with it. You're just like, okay, But same thing, foul-mouthed kids, unnecessary nudity. Absolutely, a little bit of ultra violence, especially with Bill Paxton, and all the explosions and the shit, and nuclear missile showing up in the middle of the house, and
bathroom, lots of toilet humor, lots of toilet. They turn him into a pile of shit.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, that's one of those that there are so many '80s tropes in there that it's like a perfect '80s movie.
Okay, so back to a totally different one as far as music genres go, but this one, the golden age of hip hop was the '80s. That was a huge time for rap music. That R&B had been around for a while, and all of a sudden you had this new style that kind of blew up. As a Ute. I grew up with R&B and hip hop early on. When I was in the 5th grade, my favorite group was at that time, of all time, was the Fat Boys. I was literally a member of their fan club. Nice. I wrote a letter to them. They wrote me back, sent me an autographed poster, which I wish I still had. But breaking. I remember being a 12-year-old kid going to football practice, and we'd show up first in our just our pants with our knee pads, and we would spend about 30 minutes breakdancing on the basketball courts next to the football field before we go practice and shit. And then all of a sudden breaking came out that exemplified that entire generation of hip-hop heads, you know, with the fashion, the music, the dancing. You know, it is just a ridiculously dumb movie. And of course there were so many movies that came out just kind of copying off of that formula during that time. I'm talking, there were shitloads of them.
Oh, it started that whole illegal dance thing.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, you never, that's just, like I said, your brain just puts things together. It was like, oh, it's an illegal dance thing. It's like, the only way dancing is illegal is if you're doing it on private property. And that's called trespassing. That's not like, maybe unsanctioned means that there's not like a community behind it to where there's a trophy or something. But just getting together like in a parking lot and dancing, and you're like, oh yeah, we got to practice for this illegal dance competition, or you know what I mean? Like,
right.
That started that whole trend for like, so what was it? You know, you got Breakin' 2, and it's all, you know, it's like you got that illegal. What was the series of movies that came out? It's like Step Up or something.
Oh,
You Got Served.
Like yeah.
Show that, like all of those things. But you're right. That's where it started.
And what was cool is
it's like a dance competition movie, you know.
Well, it was a huge underground thing for a long time, and the actual first movie of this kind to come out was a movie called Wild Style. It came out in 1982, and it basically focused on that underground New York hip hop shit. You know, they had dance battles. You know, the beginning of that song by the Beastie Boys, Professor Booty, where he's like, I don't want nothing to do with those dudes, man. Then why you hanging out with them? I saw you female with them too. What's up with her? I don't know if you ever remember that part. Mm-hmm. That is from the movie Wild Style, which I actually have an original VHS of that tape that I found. I got really lucky to find that one. But you know, that was the first one that came out, and Breakin' kind of like blew that shit up, dude. And next thing you know, you got all these
everybody's
fucking
dancing.
movies. Mario Van Peebles is starring in one, and they all had the same formula, but it represented that 80s generation of hip hop, like 100%. That's what it was like. It was really like that, guys. Y'all go watch this shit. People really wore that stuff out and about. People really had Michael Jackson jackets that had 16 zippers on them and wore parachute pants. I had parachute shorts. Why? The reason for parachute pants was so you wouldn't mess your knees up when you were spinning. I had shorts. Defeats the purpose 100%.
Absolutely.
Except it makes bad noise when you're fucking walking around because it's... But yeah, so Breakin' is definitely high on that list. And I said it might not be the best one. It technically wasn't the first one, but it was definitely the biggest one that started a huge fucking trend.
Well, you said it had to be set in the 80s. Back to the Future starts in the 80s.
Yes.
But, I mean, Back to the Future is mostly 50s. And there's not a whole lot of 80s. But the fact that the scenes from the 80s that show how different it is from the 50s. And if you remember, because a lot of times people get, you know, your mind gets a little bit clouded a little bit. The wistfulness of like Back to the Future and like, oh, the 80s or whatever. But if you remember, like the town square, like remember when he comes back from the future at night and there's porno theater and bums sleeping on the street.
Yeah.
And you know the town square just looks kind of run down.
Dystopian, yeah.
That's how the 80s were, really. That's whenever, you know, that Bruce Springsteen, where it's like, you know, my hometown, where it's like they're closing down the sawmill and they're closing down the stores and you know nobody comes down here to the town square or whatever. That's the 80s. That's whenever small town USA started drying up,
right? And
everything started going to Walmarts and, you know, people moving out of towns and stuff. And if you drive around like rural Texas, you'll pass through all these small towns, and their main streets look the same. It's like a little town square with a whole bunch of buildings from either the late 1800s or early 1900s. You got a main street, you got a couple side streets, and they're all boarded up with maybe an insurance office and maybe a convenience store. And then, 20 miles to the next town, and it looks the same.
Yeah.
That was very much the way, Hill Valley in the 80s did not look like it did in the 50s.
Right. Because a totally different town, different society.
You got Huey Lewis in the News. You got Libyans with rocket launchers. I swear to God, dude, I thought between Red Dawn and Back to the Future...
You were ready for somebody to show up here and start fucking shit
No,
up.
dude, I figured at some point I would be able to launch, shoot one of those with the big-ass fucking red rocket at the end. The foom.
Yeah.
I was like, man, when I grow up, they're everywhere. They're just fucking, lying around on street corners.
Well, I mean, falling down, he picked one up at the Army surplus place. He's like, how do you use this thing, kid? Just press that button right there. This one?
Yeah. One crazy summer, he went and launched rocket at the radio station. So, I mean, I forgot to put rocket launchers.
Okay, you've actually already mentioned this, but I'm gonna mention it in a different way. Any fucking John Hughes movie ever made,
all of them.
And the one that I'm going to point out, because it's so funny when this movie came out, you're watching it and you're like, I know that guy, I know that guy, I know that girl, I know that girl. Of course, Breakfast Club.
Mm-hmm.
That is fucking 100% of what we went through in high school in the 80s. Everybody, those personalities were just so apparent in every fucking city. Whether it be a big town, small town.
Every one of them's relatable.
You had those people. I knew.
Either those people are your friends, or you knew
them. Yeah. And with me, I got to a point in high school where I kind of spread myself out, where, I didn't just hang out with one group. I was like, this is fucking stupid. My friend Thomas, who, I was friends with this guy that was really into metal music. And I remember the day he showed up at my apartment with the first Pantera tape ever. And it just blew me away. And that's kind of like when I realized everybody has something to offer. I kind of want to expand myself a little bit. So I was literally friends with every single person in that fucking movie. Whether it be the jocks, cheerleaders, the emo chicks. At that time wasn't emo, they were just weird. Mm-hmm. At that time, Ricky Ryder, who was 100% Judd Nelson's character, just anti-establishment, didn't give a shit, had a shitty home life, never wanted to be around, just roamed the fucking streets all the goddamn time. I knew all those people. Mm-hmm. I was friends with all of them.
Well, and for me, I think I was thinking about it the other day. It's like you mentioned high school. When I was in high school, I was very much on the outsider side of things. I was fringe, and the reason why is because I had moved from this little small town where we were very active in the church, and I went to church school, and it was very cloistered and idealistic. And then I moved here, and even though it was just like Memorial Junior High over here, but you have all of these world-weary teenagers that are already drug addicts, and I could not relate.
It's a total shock.
I didn't understand the language they were speaking. It would have been different. It would have been exactly the same thing if you would have moved me to a whole different country where they didn't speak English at all.
Right.
I could not relate. And I always kind of resented it a little bit because I was like, man, it's like life in small town did not prepare me for the sophistication of urban living.
It was a big difference.
Because I did not understand. I couldn't relate. I wasn't even allowed to stay out after dark. And these kids are fucking going on weekend trips, unsupervised and having ODs and shit.
Right.
And I'm like, we're in fucking 8th grade, bro.
See, I could kind of relate.
I don't get it. And so I very much just pulled into myself, and then the friends that I gathered were people that we were of like mind, fellow misfits, people that also didn't relate.
Right.
Now, I've always been sociable. I've always been a people person, and I was never antisocial or angry or any of that. but I just couldn't. I couldn't relate. Like I said, if imagine if all you speak is English and you get dropped into not even freaking like Spain, where you've got to learn some Spanish, but you know some people that talk that way. You fucking drop you into Bangladesh and just be like, okay, 8th grade, go, and you're like, okay, I don't speak their language. I don't have any idea about this whole lunch thing. What are y'all doing? You know what I mean? Like, that's how I felt. So, like, everybody that I was around were people like me.
Right.
And then movies like The Breakfast Club I used to romanticize because I'm like, man, I know everything about all of these people, and I can relate, but these are all caricatures. I don't relate to the real people.
Right.
So, yeah. I mean, but it was a very impactful movie.
Oh yeah, definitely. But to the point of your story, I can relate to that so much. Just it happened to me at a much younger age. But I remember, I went to private school, Catholic school, up until the 3rd grade, and towards the end of my 3rd grade year, I got beat up by this kid for being black. And I remember that was the first time anybody had ever called me the N-word. And, I ran to my grandmother's house after school, and I was all upset. And then I got to my dad, telling my dad what happened and shit. And he was like, it's time for you to be with more people that are like you. So we're not going to do private school anymore. And I remember the first day I was in public school, it was 4th grade. First fucking day. And back then, I was in the gifted program. And that's when the gifted program were like 8 kids. It was literally 8 kids in the entire school would have to go and spend 2 hours together every day. And there was this kid in my gifted school, and I was just a real quiet, shy kid, just sitting there. And there was this redhead kid, never forget him, in my gifted class. And he was just kind of weird during class and shit. And bell rings for recess, and I'm walking outside of the playground. And as soon as I step outside the building and off the sidewalk, somebody comes from behind me, throws me on the ground, jumps on top of me, and just starts hitting me. And the school's name was Pesson Elementary. And I remember the kid saying, from the 4th grade, there's a kid on top of me, and he's saying, welcome to Pesson, motherfucker, and just punching me. Welcome to Pesson, motherfucker, and he's hitting me and shit. And I remember going home crying and telling my dad, what have you done to me?
Oh,
It's the first day of school, I got beat up. And that kid ended up being the best man at my wedding. Believe it or not.
Yeah, I guess.
But it was just that shock, just going from this group of people that behave this way to all of a sudden being stuck in fucking public school. And it wasn't the nicest area of town. It was absolutely just a culture shock, and I just kind of stayed to myself for a long time. I didn't want to talk to anybody. You're like trying to read everything and understand. These kids aren't like me. So I fully understand exactly what I just went through it at a much younger age.
Yeah. But like I said, it was, talking about Breakfast Club, because I'm watching this, I'm like, this is not, obviously I could tell that they were all much older. They weren't high school kids. They were playing high school, but it's like, I think the person I related to the most was, of the characters, was Ali Sheedy's character.
Yeah.
Where she was just quiet and being kind of
taking everything in,
doing her own thing in the corner. She didn't everybody else was poking at each other.
Yeah.
Judd Nelson was poking at all of them, but then whenever they started interacting, they're all poking at each other and trying to have conversations, and she's still just over there doing her own thing.
Right.
I always felt like that's me right there.
But then it ended up happening. Once
nobody put makeup on me. They told me I was
nobody
pretty.
gave you a makeover. By the time I got to 5th grade, it was interesting because all of a sudden I started realizing that these kids were just like me. All these kids like He-Man too.
Yeah.
And next thing I know, we got a big group of people and we're taking pictures with our He-Man for the yearbook and shit. So yeah, eventually it came around, but just that initial fucking shock.
Oh yeah.
And I literally told my dad, I was like, "What have you done to me? Why did you do this?"
I had a similar conversation. We were here and because I went to the junior high school, and again, just what's going on? I don't get it. And it was fine, but it was just because nobody was actually overtly rude or whatever, but they were dismissive. And then you'd be sitting there okay, what's everybody doing? And so I'm coming from a world, it's you want to come spend the night? and they're like, "Oh, well, so and so's parents aren't home. We're gonna go over there and smoke some weed." And like again, 8th grade, and like I just came out of this little Christian church where it's like if it like. I'm gonna smoke weed tonight. But back then, it was like weed was the devil,
right?
You know, it's like you're gonna inhale a little bit of smoke, and then you're just fucking like dance in the woods naked all night. Which even now I'm like, that's cool. But back then I was fucking horrified. Like, and I didn't have anything to speak to. I'm like, I'm just gonna go home and watch TV. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
So yeah, but yeah, absolutely. But I think that's why Breakfast Club lasts and it holds up is because those personalities don't change.
Right.
They're still there, and and everybody recognizes a little bit of themselves in every character.
Yeah.
So I don't know. My last entry, probably just because I always like talking about it because it's awesome, but it kind of checks most of the boxes, is Monster Squad.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, you've got nobody's taking anything seriously. The kids are the only ones that are standing between the world and the end of the world. And you've got all these monsters, and they're scary monsters, especially to the kids, because, you know, monsters are scary to kids. But at the end, it's the only movie that actually like pays any sort of lip service to the fact that the kids might actually know what's going on. And that's when the little boy writes the letter to the army, and he's like, "Dear Army, send guys, there's monsters." And the army shows up, and they're like, "We got this letter. Where's the monsters?" That's one of those, you're not going to get that in an ending in any movie after that. You know what I mean? It's like, it was so unexpected to have the military actually show up because a little boy sent a misspelled letter to the army that said, "Please send army guys, there's monsters." And they're like, "Okay, saddle up, boys."
Okay, so another one that I don't know if I'd say it had unnecessary nudity, but it had plenty of nudity, and it was just, the movie was just interesting, would be Risky Business. That is definitely one that would fall under that category. That Porsche that he had at that time, that was a killer fucking car. That was just an absolutely amazing car. But Kid, Home Alone, you know, everybody can relate to those times when the parents split. Left you by yourself, some wood floors to slide on, and he sucks. But yeah, Risky Business is one that I definitely thought of when I think 80s as far as soundtrack. Weird ass storyline. A kid in high school starts pimping. You think about that shit for a second. I mean, that's just a weird ass movie.
The things that got green lighted back then.
Oh shit!
Like, okay, I've got this horrifying concept. All right, well, what if we put Tom Cruise in there and a Bob Seger song behind it? That's money.
And Porsche sales are going to skyrocket. Right. Trust me. They'll buy into it. We can use their car. But yeah, Risky Business was definitely a very, very 80s movie. For sure.
Well, of all the movies we discussed, several of them were on our list from earlier, from the movies that came out. Yeah. But interestingly enough, I think the clear winner here is Lost Boys, because it's like on every list. Like it crosses so many different. It's horror. It's got Corey Feldman. It's like all the different stuff.
Is both Coreys. I mean,
yeah,
both Coreys.
It's a Corey's movie, and it's a horror movie. And
what was funny is most people remember the Coreys being in it. They were supporting cast. You know, they weren't the main cast members. You know.
Well, I'll say Corey Haim is. He's kind of the main character.
Yes. Yeah.
But
I think his brother Michael would be more of a main character. But Corey, those are the people you remember from it.
But I'm thinking, like, if you're finishing listening to this and you haven't gone to watch Domination Ninja 3, finish the podcast, and then as of this date, Lost Boys was number 2 on this date in 1987 it was probably going to take the number one spot, but eventually. But go watch Lost Boys. It's probably been a while. It's a good movie, man. It's a good movie. Man, I think with that has been episode 184, Quintessentially 80s. This is the Scary Dad Podcast. As always, if you like what you're hearing, subscribe, hit like, say hi on the Facebook page or the Instagram page, one or the other, or both. We're not picky. Come to the Houston Horror Film Festival in August. You better hurry your ass up because the hotel's sold out. The tickets are
sold out.
pretty much
going pretty quick.
All the way gone. And with that, keep it scary.
Later.